Got it. Okay. Hi, everyone. We will be starting in just 1 minute on Zoom and on YouTube. Thanks. Got it. Okay. Okay, everything seems to be working. That's reassuring. Very good then. Good afternoon or good evening and welcome. My name is Mark Memagonian. I'm the Director of Academic Affairs for the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research. It's good to welcome everybody once again after a little bit of a break. And we have a program today that I think really was conceived of in the very immediate aftermath of the elections and then the runoff in Turkey, and a sense that I had, which perhaps our panelists will affirm or dispel, since they are the experts, that this was not really being. I was surprised that there wasn't more discussion in various circles about the implications for Armenia, the country, and for Armenians as a people, whether in Armenia or in Turkey or in the diaspora. And it seemed like a necessary thing to have this event. So I want to thank the panelists who came together rather quickly to do this. And I want to acknowledge and thank the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation for their continued ongoing support of our NAASR Gulbenkian Foundation series on contemporary Armenian issues, of which this is most definitely one. I now want to remind the audience again that during the remarks and discussion among the panelists and afterwards, you are welcome to submit questions using the Zoom Q&A feature at the bottom, and we will get to as many of them as possible afterwards. And with that, I want to turn things over to our moderator, Dr. Lerna Ekmekcioglu. Lerna is the McMillan-Stewart Associate Professor of History and the Director of the Women and Gender Studies program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She's a familiar face, good friend and colleague, and I gladly and gratefully put this in her hands. Lerna.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We'll spend the next 75 to 90 minutes thinking about the implications of the election, about which I'm not going to talk. As we all know, it was in late May, and Erdogan won another 5 years at least, which was a surprising development for many people, not everyone. We will be talking about what that means, that victory of AKP for Armenians in Turkey, for Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijani relationships, as well as how it has been presented, both in Turkish media and also maybe in Armenian media as well. And when we say Armenia, we will hopefully also cover the triangle the triangle meaning the triangular relationship that also involves the Armenian diaspora in Europe, the United States, and the Middle East. So in terms of what we'll do format, I will first introduce the panelists, and then I will ask each one of them a different question. We'll go one round, answers, and then I'll ask another round of questions. And then depending on how it goes, I might ask a third round of questions, or we might go to the question and answer session and take audience questions. Okay, so we have Dr. Ohannes Kılıçdağı with us, who is a sociologist a historian and a columnist. He received his undergraduate degrees in the Sociology and Political Science department at Boğaziçi University of Istanbul. He continued his doctoral studies in the same university's Department of History with a dissertation titled Sociopolitical Reflections and Expectations of the Ottoman Armenians after the 1908 Revolution Between Hope and Despair, which he defended in 2014. Dr. Kılıçdağı worked as an associate professor of sociology at Istanbul's Bilgi University until his move to the United States in 2017. Since then, he has taught courses at Columbia University, University of Chicago, and California State University of Fresno. Dr. Kılıçdağ's special interests are the history of non-Muslims in the Ottoman Empire and Turkey, intercommunal relations in multi-ethno-religious societies, citizenship and minorities, and the history of citizenship and military service. He has been writing a column in the Turkish Armenian weekly Agos since 2011 and bridging his historical sociological knowledge of the place with contemporary affairs. Our second panelist is Dr. Varuzhan Geghamyan, who earned his PhD in history from St. Petersburg State University of Russia. Currently, he works at Yerevan State University's Faculty of Oriental Studies as an assistant professor. He's an expert on Turkey and the Middle East, and as such, he worked in the Ministry of Defense of the Republic of Armenia and government bodies from 2016 to 2018. From 2019 to 21, he was the advisor of Armenia's President Armen Sarkisyan on Turkey and the Middle East. As an expert, Dr. Geghamyan appeared on various different media, from Newsweek to Fox News to Al Jazeera, writing op-eds and giving interviews. He has also authored 3 monographs: History of the Turkish Republic, Handbook of Modern Azerbaijan, and the third one is Hate Speech Against Armenia in Turkey. He is the author of 11 articles and numerous analytical reports about regional political and geopolitical developments. And he speaks many languages: Armenian, Russian, English, Azerbaijani, Turkish, and Persian. And we have Ayda Erbal with us, who is an adjunct professor of politics at New York University, Department of Politics, where she teaches courses on Middle Eastern politics and democratic theory. She's interested in the politics of post-national historiographies in transitional settings, the political economy of mass violence and state formation, the politics of apology, dignity as a constitutional term, and politics of infrastructure. Erbal is also a managing editor of Haytert, which some of you might know, but I think it's good to mention. It's www.haytert.org, Haytert, HYETERT.org, a multilingual minority news aggregation site in Turkey, and one of the founding editors of Azat Alik, which is a multilingual politics blog primarily dealing with minority issues in Turkey. So we really have a great group of people who are most capable of providing us at least like both an initial and also an in-depth conversation, brainstorming, thinking together of the topics at hand. So with that, my first question goes to Ohannes. And ideally, each person will have 5 to 7 minutes for each question. What was the level of support for Erdogan among the Armenian community, Ohannes? How can we know this? And if we can, how can we know it? And if it's ever really knowable? Did they side, the Armenians in Turkey, did they side with Erdogan or with his opponents? If the latter, are there consequences to it? Do we observe any increased anti-Armenian activity in post-election Turkey today? The floor is yours.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Lerna. And first of all, let me thank NAASR and McMillan-Stewart for putting this together and giving me the chance to become a part of it. I think I agree with the comment that it has not been discussed enough. The influence of these elections on Armenian community, and also on the relations between Turkey and Armenia. Coming to your question, what was the level of support in Armenian community to Erdogan and his party, AKP? Although we do not have solid numbers or ratios, I think one can easily say that there is a certain base of support in Armenian community to Erdogan and AKP. Given some supporting remarks of some members of the community in social media and also in other platforms, and also given some supporting remarks of some representatives of the Armenian community, supporting Erdogan and government, of course, first and foremost, the current Armenian patriarch himself. So there are, in other words, some clues and indicators that Erdogan and AKP have, again, a certain support among Armenians in Turkey. Is there a way to understand or to show this more concretely? More or less, yes, there's a way. As the members of Armenian community are concentrated in few neighborhoods of Istanbul, one can tell the level of support from Armenians to Erdogan and AKP by studying ballot boxes of these neighborhoods in detail. Of course, these ballot boxes are not just peculiar to Armenians, Armenian members of Armenian community, but, some ballot boxes on the list of voters in some ballot boxes, I think, is more than 60-70% Armenian, depending on the neighborhood. And so by studying these, the results coming from these ballot boxes will give us a more, let's say, concrete perspective or idea about the support of Armenians to Erdogan and AKP. However, as far as I know, no one has conducted such a research up to this time. In the lack of or such a research, we can only make some guesses, okay, about the support of Armenians to Erdogan. And my guess about this support, if I am to give let's say, a percentage, my guess is that it's somewhere between 20-25%, I think, the Armenian support to Erdogan and AKP. But, although, by the way, let me mention this, although it's not direct part of your question, I also wonder the turnout among Armenians in parliamentary and presidential elections, as it would be an indicator of their interest in Turkish politics, in politics of the country, and also their hope about if there is any hope to change or to betterment, and their expectations. It would be also interesting to compare this turnout with the turnout in the elections of Armenian foundations, which held last year. And during the election of Armenian foundations, their boards, eventually the turnout is very low in Armenian community. If I'm not wrong, if I remember correctly, it's somewhere between 30%, something like that, I think, which is very low, especially among the Armenian youth. So again, it would be very interesting to compare the turnout ratio in presidential and parliamentary elections with turnout ratio in foundational elections. But again, in the lack of such research, let's say, we can only make some estimations and guesses. And as I said, my guess, at least, is, I mean, my observational, if you like, guess is that the level of support to Erdogan in Armenian community is somewhere between 20-25%. I think which was higher during the initial years of the AKP rule. And, you know, at a certain extent, it is understandable as AKP in mid-2000s made some reforms, I mean, legal reforms, basically, which widened the opportunities of Armenian foundations. And by the way, I mean, for those who are not familiar with the issue, when I say foundations, practically, I mean schools, churches, I know, orphanages, hospitals, cemeteries, etc. So when I say Armenian foundations, you can understand all the institutions on which the Armenian social life is based. Okay, so again, AKP made some reforms in mid-2000s, which widened the opportunities of these foundations. And for the first time in Republican history, these reforms opened the way of returning some previously extorted properties of Armenian foundations. So during these initial years, to cut the long story short, during these initial years, the level of support to Erdogan and AKP, I think, was higher in Armenian community.
Thank you.
So, okay.
We'll continue with the second round.
Then for the first round, if you like, let me stop here. Okay, I can continue on the second round. Thank you.
Perfect. I already have many questions, and I'm sure the audience too. Let's go to Varuzhan now, which I think is going to follow really well, because I think many people are questioning that support that came from the Armenians in Turkey to Erdogan. Erdogan's statement, Varuzhan, during the 2020 war, that Turks would, and I quote, continue to fulfill the mission of their grandfathers, which was carried out a century ago in the Caucasus, end of quote, has been interpreted in various ways, ranging from a threat of genocidal violence to a simple statement of intent to continue to project influence in the region. How do we understand this statement, and how will Erdogan, do you think, fulfill this mission in the years ahead?
Thank you, Lerna. There's an old Jewish saying which says, when somebody treats you or saying that they are going to kill you, it's better to believe him rather than not. In our case, this is actually one of the ways to explain Erdogan's and not only Erdogan's, by the way, other high-ranking Turkish military and political actors' statements in the recent 3 to 4 years, which they are constantly and permanently delivering towards Armenia, both for the local audience in Turkey and for the Armenian audience outside of Turkey. So when we are saying that there is a possibility of continuous pressure on Armenia, which can have also the ways of or take ways and formats of full-scale, for example, military attack or other kind of military political pressure, we are not exaggerating the situation, because at least in 2020, we have seen actually an open and obvious support of Turkey to Azerbaijan in its endeavor, not only against Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, but also against the international recognized territory of the Republic of Armenia. And in the recent 2 or 3 years, from November 2020, when Azerbaijan officially attacked the sovereign territory of the Republic of Armenia. Question here, it is important to say that it's a sovereign territory, not ever disputed, not ever discussed. Turkey obviously, and again, I mean, on the ground, it is supporting military attack, and according to some or open source intelligence materials, it is also part of this attacks. So it's not just a political statement, but rather a policy in action. At least we can say that there is an interest in continuing the pressure on the Republic of Armenia, with the hope that this pressure will bring Armenian political factor in South Caucasus to a lowest possible level. And at the same time, if there is a possibility to take some control over some lands which are having crucial importance in the geopolitical, let's say, whole landscape of the region, well, let's do that, as they did in some of the eastern and southern provinces of the Republic of Armenia. We have at least 400 square kilometers officially recognized as occupied in the frames and the borders of the Republic of Armenia. Again, not Nagorno-Karabakh, which is kind of an official, let's say, reason for the conflict before 2020. So here I would like to mention for the audience who are following us, why it is important for Turkey. I mean, why the problem is not about Karabakh, but rather about, in general, Armenian-Turkish conflict. There are two main reasons for this. The first one is a very basic one. Armenia and South Caucasus in general, of which Armenia is the most western, let's say, part. South Caucasus is a bordering region, and naturally, as any other country, especially if we use the term middle power in the world, there were great powers, we have middle powers, which has, let's say, have desires and ambitions like great powers, and sometimes also their opportunities. The neighboring region is important to have influence on. So naturally, Turkey is trying to create its influence over Armenia. And by saying influence, it means definitely lowering the level of sovereignty and independence and bringing your own influence here. And at the same time, if we take out this neighboring part, South Caucasus in general, it is a crucial geopolitical spot on the map, on the geopolitical map of Eurasia. And that's why we have so many international actors engaged in what's happening in South Caucasus. And that's why sometimes even some scholars, some journalists used terms like Third World War or the World War of local importance, or small countries, big war, for the wars which are happening in South Caucasus. And naturally, Turkey, which has ambitions to widen its geopolitical influence in the region, definitely has interest in South Caucasus. So this is double interest in that sense. And that's why naturally Turkey is engaged in whatever happening in South Caucasus, and it's naturally doing its best in that sense to have influence over the three major, let's say, countries in the South Caucasus. They have influence over Azerbaijan, and they are making more. They have at least political and economic influence over Georgia, and there is only one country which is kind of a, let's say, making some obstacle over having the greatest influence in the region. It is Armenia. And now there is an attack in this direction. And that's why we are seeing from 2019, by the way, 1 year before the war happened, we have witnessed a lot of statements by Erdogan himself, by the all the military and political elite, about even the which were actually questioning the even existence of the Armenian state, like the speech by Erdogan in National Archives on April 24th, if I'm not mistaken, 2019, when he has a very large speech about Armenia, and he spoke about he used this term, saying that 100 years ago there was no even Armenia on the lands which are right now Armenia. So this was first ever from 90s when highest ranking Turkish official is actually putting some question about the actual very existence of the Republic of Armenia. Again, not disputed Nagorno-Karabakh, not Artsakh issue. And now we are having a lot of these kind of statements. And as I said, these are not just statements, but rather policy in action, mainly done through the, let's say, tools of Azerbaijan and through the, let's say, channels of Azerbaijan. But clearly there is a goal to do that. And one more thing, I'm more than sure in the context of elections, not any political actor besides probably except for HDP, no other political party, no other political figure has ever contested this attitude and this approach. So this is not just an Erdoganist approach, but rather very natural, by the way, Turkish ambitions in the region, which are being translated right now by Erdogan.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Varuzhan. I think we might come back to this, like the difference of HDP, the Kurdish or pro-Kurdish party, in terms of the political spectrum in Turkey, as kind of possibly having, or at least giving us the indications that if they were part of the coalition and real political power, they would have a different type of relationship with Armenia and Armenians. And when they were, anyways, we can maybe compare what happened in the 2015 elections, June, the 13% that HDP got, and their policy, at least vis-a-vis the recognition of the genocide, and their position as part of the opposition during the last round. Okay, but now I think we'll continue with in terms of differences between maybe 2020 or even pre-2020 and now. And I'm going to ask the question now to Ayda. Ayda, in your opinion, and in terms of what you can see in the press, what was the significance of Pashinyan's attendance at the Erdogan ceremony? How was it viewed by Armenians in Turkey, in Armenia, or in the diaspora?
Good afternoon, all. Thank you, Lerna. Thank you, Mark, for organizing this. Thank you, speakers. It's nice to chat to you this afternoon. I saw Ohannes has a picture as well. I have the same picture, in picture here. I'm not going to talk too much about that one. Probably Ohannes is going to talk about this a little bit. But the Turkish press covered in a very good light, I have to say, Pashinyan's visit, because obviously this is being written to Turkey's book as a victory of sorts in a number of ways, because Turkey has the key right now to the relations. And then, although of course Özkanyan thinks that the key is really in Baku's hands, via Turkey, of course, enabling them, Turkey has an upper hand right now in the negotiations. And part of the reason why Pashinyan has been criticized by the Armenians, particularly by Özkanyan as well, besides others. I just want to show one more picture. This is just from the reception, as you see, Bahçeli is behind, and then they're chatting leisurely. And this was kind of one of the main pictures used in the Turkish press. And this is also a picture that we came across several times in the reporting of this event, which had also repercussions in Armenia. By the way, Turkish press reported from Armenian press and Armenian elite as well, that I'm going to talk about their reporting of Armenian elite, because they are paying attention very closely to the point of following them in the Facebook pages and whatnot. So because part of the reporting comes from the Armenian elite's Facebook page. Anyway, this particular picture got made rounds both in Armenia and Turkey. As you see here, Pashinyan is sitting right behind Aliyev, and this is how it was perceived in Armenia. So Artur Khachaturian said basically that among 100 seats, let's face it, if it's just behind Pashinyan sitting behind Aliyev, this is not a coincidence. To which Ararat Mirzoyan, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, said, first of all, you're making a mountain out of a mothball. This is nothing. Almost he kind of belittled this assessment, saying that all prime ministers are sitting in the second row, and nothing is by design, really. It's just that all prime ministers are sitting in the second row. Of course, all prime ministers are sitting in the second row, but are they sitting the way they want them to sit? In other words, did they come there and then sit like that, or were there sort of seats assigned? If seats are assigned, which I'm guessing seats are assigned, it's by design. But anyway, so he kind of brushed it away. And Melkonian, they reported from Melkonian as well, and then he said, preconditions became more threatening, and it will be more threatening towards the future because Armenia doesn't have much left in terms of being able to challenge their offers. To which Mirzoyan said that they have repeated for a number of years now that Armenia does not have any preconditions. By the way, Mirzoyan also said that Turkey does not have any preconditions. Of course, precondition speech going back to, of course, the whole idea of whether genocide recognition and condemnation is going to be part of a precondition package, which Mirzoyan said it's not going to be because it has not part of our discussions on current issues. And Vartan Oskanyan has been very critical of Pashinyan's visit. Actually, he said that Mitsotakis and Macron did not go to this meeting, and for a reason. By the way, Mitsotakis and Macron did not go to this meeting, but several Western European countries, including Germany, had been and Sweden, they have been represented as either by former presidents or second-degree diplomats, or first-degree diplomats, or second-degree legislative elite. So they have been represented to a certain extent, but certainly not Mitsotakis or Macron, because Oskanyan said that Erdogan's remarks, derogatory remarks against them in the past, probably was the culprit. And then Oskanyan also said that Pashinyan does not understand that his visit is not going to make much of a difference, because the key to the negotiations is really in Baku's hand by way of Turkey. Turkey basically granting, in that sense, kind of a kingmaker. I mean, this is not Oskanyan saying, I'm sort of paraphrasing what he said. One more thing, I agree with, by the way, Ohannes, that historically speaking, Armenians were more of a sort of pro-AKP Armenian community in Istanbul, and there are reasons for that. And reasons are not necessarily just I think limited to the fact that AKP had more pro-foundation legislation, and then CHP, the main opposition party, was against. I think it has more to do with the way economics also have been part and parcel to this decision. Armenians are, businessmen and also a lot of sort of financiers and whatnot still in this day and age. Even though, of course, we see more Armenian intellectuals very active on Twitter and Facebook, kind of setting the tone of the discussions. I think this is more idealistic rather than materialistic, really. And with the material sort of decision is more on the side of AKP for a number of historical and sort of contemporary reasons. I would like to talk a little bit about one reason, which sort of kind of we understand, and it ties nicely to what Ohannes said about foundations. During this foundation meetings, when that was part of the EU accession sort of package that Turkey was trying to comply with. Nobody thinks out of their good hearts, but as a sort of a precondition of Turkey's access to EU. At the time, CHP, the main opposition party, Republican People's Party, was extremely against the foundations, and they kept bringing, to the extent of taking this to a court case. Deniz Baykal at the time sort of wanted to sue AKP because they thought that AKP is giving Armenians something that Greece are not giving Turks. So they brought to table this whole idea of reciprocity, which is, of course, part of Lausanne. So that's one thing. And
why don't we continue, Ayda, with during the second round with the second?
Okay, one little bit here, and then I'm going to wrap up. People do not pay attention what's written on party programs. Obviously, this last round of elections is just, like it was a coalition. Therefore, the party program did not have this kind of article. But in the previous round of CHP's party program for the previous elections, CHP actually had a reciprocity article on the party program for elections, which was not covered by Armenian intellectuals in Turkey, which is, Armenian public intellectuals in Turkey, which is a kind of a interesting thing, at least for me. Thank you. I'll come back to more, because we have an MP elected from AKP. I'm going to talk a little bit about his sort of path. Thank you.
That's great. Yes, and maybe even potentially compare it with the previous MP from Armenian MP from AKP. Great. And I would, if there is time, I would also really think with you in terms of these the images that we saw after the earthquake in terms of what Armenia sent to Turkey, because I think that there is a linear continuity between that point in time, I don't know, it's not an event, but that process, which reminded me at least of the 1999 moment between Greece and Turkey, post-earthquakes, and from there to Pashinyan's visit.
Definitely. I will talk about it because
Yes,
I talked
that's
about
good.
this as well. And obviously, Oskanyan also talks about it. Oskanyan has a comment on it. I'll come back to that.
Okay,
Thanks for
great.
reminding. I'll come back
Of
to
course.
that. There's
Yes.
a bit about that.
Perfect. So, Ohannes, now the floor is again yours, but I also need to remind everyone that I'll give each one of you 5 minutes at the end of the second round, I think, for you to be able to respond to each other. Maybe 5 to 7 minutes, actually, because I know, and now I want to be a panelist myself, because there's a lot to talk about here. Okay, but let's keep the structure intact for now. So yes, and I look at the question, and it's very much in line with how Ayda ended. Ohannes, for Armenians, is the known Erdogan better than the unknown? So I guess this is an invitation to continue the conversation about the support.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting question for me because I have never put this as between known versus unknown, because I have never imagined that any political party or any political leader in Turkey is unknown to Armenian community. And actually, I don't have any impression or indicator that there is a feeling or sense of unknowingness, let's say, among Armenians toward any political leader or any political party in Turkey. In fact, I mean, historically speaking, CHP or Republican People's Party, I mean, the main opposition party, has a negative image in the eyes of Armenians as well as other minorities, as it, institutionally speaking, as it is the party in history which adopted discriminatory policies toward these groups, I mean minority groups, especially Christian and Jewish minority groups. Moreover, I don't know to what extent the members of Armenian community remember this, but Kemal Kılıçdağı, the leader of Republican People's Party and main opposition party, applied to the Constitutional Court in 2008 for the cancellation of reforms for minority foundations that I mentioned before as an improving factor. In fact, I mean, Kılıçdağı, as the followers of Turkish politics would know, initiated a campaign under the name of, in Turkish, helalleşme, I think, which can be translated into coming to terms, and which aims, and this campaign aims to recognize the discriminatory and repressive policies against certain groups in Turkey. And as a part of this campaign, Kılıçdağı made some declarations targeting Kurds and Alevis before the elections, and he used such a language, such a discourse, which accepted these injustices and discrimination against these people. However, as far as I can follow, he did not make any declaration just directly targeting Armenians or other Christians and Jews by their name. So it is difficult to say how much this campaign of helalleşme resonated among Armenians. But I think from a historical perspective, especially among older generations, this CHP, Republicans People Party, as the main opposition party, has a negative image, which is, I mean, difficult to wipe out, if you like. But having said all this, let me add that it will be misleading to think that Armenians vote solely in accordance with some or Armenian perspective or Armenian interests. I mean, let's do not forget that they are part of the society they live in. So as individual citizens and as individuals, whatever, they are also affected from other, let's say, factors, such as high inflation in the country, unemployment rate in the country, or whatever, high influx of immigrants or refugees in Turkey, okay? So as other individuals in Turkey, Armenians also, let's say, consider these factors when they vote. And I think, again, it's difficult to measure and to separate the effect of each factor in their voting. But of course, they vote not only in accordance with Armenian quote-unquote interest or Armenian perspective, they are also affected from other factors. Just a note, maybe we can discuss later. I said that in mid-2000s, AKP made some reforms for the betterment of minority foundations, including Armenian ones. But this is not the whole story. If we consider the performance, if you like, of AKP and Erdogan toward minority communities, including Armenians, we can say that it shows a parallelity with their general political stance or their general political course. Basically, as again, the followers of Turkish politics would know that their initial years, as Ayda mentions, because of their motivation to access to EU, let's say, they made some more, let's say, liberal reforms, or let's say reforms that opens the way of, let's say, a betterment for Armenian and other minority foundations. However, again, in parallel to their general course of more, having more national and, let's say, more aggressive, more authoritarian, let's say, political discourse, it has its reflection on minority politics. For example, they blocked the foundational elections from 2013 to 2022 without any reasonable excuse. It was a long time which brought about some deteriorations on Armenian foundations. Or before that, similarly, of course, in collaboration with some members of the Armenian community, they also blocked the patriarchal elections for, again, 9 years. So, to cut the long story short, to sum up, I would say that AKP's and Erdogan's performance regarding to minority politics presents a parallelity with their general political story, if you like, general political trajectory. Okay, let me stop here, not to steal the time of other panelists. So if you like, we can elaborate on this later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Perfect. So we are now going to foreign policy, I guess. Varuzhan, is it possible for Erdogan to maintain the one nation, two states relationship with Azerbaijan and at the same time improve relations with Armenia? Unmute, please.
This is my fault. Sorry. Yeah, Lerna, to answer to your question, probably I should make a rhetoric question. Is there a real reason, or even I would say, is there a real desire at the Turkish side to have good relations with Armenia? This is one of the questions which are never being problematized, both in academia and in political discussions in general, because usually we are saying that there is a problem and the problem should be solved. and two nations should live in peace, and two states should live in good relationship as neighbors. But whether there is a real understanding of the importance of the peace and stability, and the way that let's say two nations and two states should be on the, let's say, equal level on Turkish side, I really doubt this.
You are
Hello.
back, Varuzhan. For a short while, we lost you, but now we can see you, and I think we will be able to hear you.
So can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, this is Yerevan night internet connection. I mean, is there a real desire? This is one of the questions that should be problematized. And here I would say that especially right now, based on what we have to make analysis, and this is as I said already in my previous part, based on the policy in action, based on the statements, based on the general, let's say, rhetoric which is being constructed both in Turkey and in Azerbaijan, there is no real desire to have peace and stability with Armenia, the way Armenia somehow visualize and somehow, let's say, imagine the peace in the region. Instead of that, what we have each time permanent preconditions for that peace, which are not preconditions to fulfill and then have the, let's say, age of peace, but rather preconditions to make new preconditions. Just one brilliant example is the situation with the pre-2020, when we have three, let's say, natural, classically would not say, Turkish preconditions for the reconciliation with Armenia and opening of the borders. All the three preconditions are fulfilled now after 2020. But instead of that, we don't have open borders. Instead of that, we don't have real, let's say, negotiations and real reconciliation, but rather we have new preconditions, starting with the so-called Zangezur corridor, which should cross the Syunik region and connect directly Turkey and Azerbaijan up to, for example, the closure of the Armenian nuclear plant at Metsamor, which is kind of an ecological threat to Turkey, but in case it is the, let's say, sole provider of Armenia's energy stability and energy sovereignty, providing more than 40% of whole Armenian electricity. So, I mean, all the preconditions on the Turkish side are not, let's say, concentrated and are not aimed at having peace, but rather making Armenia to be at the situation where the new, let's say, concessions to Turkish side should be inevitable. And in that, I mean, the former Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu, and currently one of the members of the Altılı Masa, one of the core members of opposition, last year in December, in one of his interviews, he said that now it is the right time for Turkey to take from Armenia whatever it can take and whatever it wants to take. So, I mean, this is probably the best ever formula for the Turkish understanding of the peace and reconciliation with the Armenian side. And at the same time, we should talk about Azerbaijan and Turkey-Azerbaijan relations. If we leave all the historical, let's say, context in which we should clearly, those who are, I mean, a little bit familiar with historical, let's say, emergence of the Republic of Azerbaijan in South Caucasus, they are actually familiar that this was kind of a, let's say, a Turkish or Ottoman political project implemented in South Caucasus rather than just a country which emerged out of nothing. So, I mean, naturally, Turkey is very, very much interested in what's happening with Azerbaijan, and naturally, it sees actually Azerbaijan as, in a way, continuation of Turkey in South Caucasus. And nowadays, we see that the Turkish foreign policy and Turkish, let's say, state capital provides opportunity for Turkey to implement what was somehow imagined back 100 years ago, now in new terms and with the new tools. And that's why we see that not only Turkey is directly participating in the state building process of Azerbaijan, and actually it did from the early beginning of the post-Soviet period. But also we see that there is a clear tendency towards emergence of two-state systems into each other. And one of the probably the most vivid examples of this is the emergence of merge of two armies right now. We see both again on the level of rhetorics, and we see the Turkish officially Turkish military personnel right now are in charge of Azerbaijani army. Probably the best example is the deputy head chief of staff, deputy chief of staff of Turkish forces, armed forces, to be appointed as the chief advisor to Aliyev in Azerbaijan, which is, I mean, clear sign. And this is not just a simple person, but rather a very famous one, Bahtiyar Ersay, who was one of the most important figures in 2020 war. So, I mean, the emergence of armies, the emergence of other state systems, and Turkish gradually and permanent, let's say, integration into what's happening in the occupied parts of Nagorno-Karabakh are clear signs that one nation, actually two states, are even, it's not just, let's say, a very trending thing, but rather it's already an outdated thing, because trends are showing us that we are right now in the process of transformation of this one nation, two states into one nation and one state. And this is the clear, we see this on the level of rhetorics, and it is being constantly constructed in Turkish, at least what I can say, monitoring Turkish press. And I can say definitely this is one of the things that are being done in Azerbaijan.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Varuzhan. Obviously, it leads to the most logical and I think relevant question of how can you make peace with a party that does not want to make peace? And if you are in a position that you desperately need peace, which I think Armenia needs, right? Because it has to be free from attacks. Like what are the options that party has, right? Which I would love us to talk about. But maybe we can bring the diaspora, if it's a party at all, if it's an actor, is relevant or not, I'm not sure. But Ayda, I would like to hear from you if you think that if you think the Armenian diaspora is relevant in this matrix of relationships, if you think they should be, and if yes, how can it be achieved?
This is a broad topic that I don't want to delve.
All of them are broad topics. You have,
I would rather go back to the sort of smaller topic, which I feel more comfortable. But just a couple of ideas here. I mean, this is only observational. There is a research done with Ratchelingilian that I was also part of, which I'm not going to report about, not today. But observational since this last round of, since let's say where Lerna left, the earthquake. First of all, this earthquake is different than the previous earthquake, because in the previous earthquake, the relationships between Armenia and Turkey were very much strained. There were practically no relations in that sense. And then I remember Armenia had one of the most experienced sort of the excavators, Erbal, and then first responders at the time. But then they have been turned down. And I remember also like private sort of citizens being there. I remember Ani Kalayjian was there as a psychologist, and she was able to work. But then as a sort of an Armenians from Armenia, they were not necessarily be let at the time. This time it was not like that. This was much more of a joint effort from everywhere. And of course, the size of back-to-back earthquakes, we had four of them back-to-back. And then it was very major, big. Özkanyan talked about that too. Özkanyan sort of connected the dots, as Lerna was saying, that there was a degree of goodwill because of the earthquake. But then Özkanyan says that Pashinyan should understand that goodwill is not going to get translated into much in terms of political gains. because that's separate than, actual political agenda, and then the political sort of narrative and function, which is only open into one direction, especially given that Nagorno-Karabakh is kind of out of question right now. Let's face it. And going back to whether diaspora should be relevant this point onward, obviously diaspora has to be relevant or has to be in this function, but it's a tough cohort in that sense, in the sense that, for example, when we talk about diaspora, what do we mean by diaspora? Do we mean American Armenians? Do we mean Russian Armenians, who are the two main sort of, in terms of population, larger diasporas? And what about their interests? And then, just as Ohannes was saying, Armenians' interests are not necessarily dictated by just their ethnic identity. There are all sorts of identities, especially financial, economic being one of them, dictating all sorts of policy making choices vis-a-vis Armenia. I'm guessing, if there are pro-Putin sort of businessmen within Russia, that their interest is going to be aligned with more Russia being an active sort of player in this than any other Armenians elsewhere in the world. So it's very tough. The fact that Armenian political opinion is this fragmented across nations and across boundaries and across sort of different citizenships, it makes it all the more difficult to figure out exactly how Armenians from all around the world can sort of make a difference. The only thing that I really think about is that Armenians have to make a decision at some point, and this is not necessarily just me talking about this. I have heard other political scientists from Armenia saying the same thing. They have to make a decision about whether it's much better to be in Turkey's hinterland or Russian hinterland, or, and then, by the way, speaking of Turkeys and Russians, kind of Turkeys and Russian interest also, there are times they're overlapping, or they're not as antagonistic as they were when Turkey was only on the NATO camp. So there's a lot of revision that has been done by Turkey itself. Turkey was able to go Turkey was able to divert itself from a status quo foreign policy in the last 20 years, with some gains, I have to say. I'm looking just from a Turkish perspective. They're not necessarily going into full NATO direction as they used to be. There was not much surprises in Turkish foreign policy, but there are right now, especially with the F-35, S-400, sort of that whole discussion. So in that sense, anything that we are talking about, even today, is going to be a little bit passé in the next 2-3 months, especially if there is a settlement in the Ukraine-Russia war, which is going to dictate the direction of the entire region to a certain extent because of Russia. So, and then in terms of diaspora having an opinion, it's a bit depressing, because I remember, and this is by observation only and not necessarily based on any kind of research, but observation only. If you look at people's social media posts, I'm leaving aside the intellectuals on Twitter, because journalists and intellectuals and authors, academics, they have a different set of engagement ideas, or they have a different set of interests and priorities than lay people. But if you look at lay people, I don't know whether, and this is a question for you as well, I don't know whether you see any interest to Armenia or Nagorno-Karabakh from diaspora Armenians, besides the people who are aligned with political parties in diaspora. Do you see any sort of interest? My little observation is that very limited. Is that after the war they became less and less involved, and then they kind of got more introverted in that sense. Perhaps because it's a major loss and it's depressing that people disengaged, And then also, being interested in Armenian politics is very tasking, in the sense that if you're not speaking the language, you cannot follow everything, from neither from foreign language press within Armenia proper through NGOs, or let's say New York Times. Obviously, these are not proper outlets to follow what's going on in Armenia proper. So that way, there's a lot of difficulties, and Armenians at some point should not perhaps make a decision whether they should be in the Turkey's hinterland or Russian hinterland. They have to really make a decision about whether they themselves have they see their future enmeshed with Armenian future, Armenian state future. And I'm very serious about that. Do people really think about moving back at some point, even in their old age? Is Armenia a kind of a place that is imagined for them in the future? Or was it so, let's say, before the war? Is it less than after the war? You know, I don't know. So these are questions, serious questions, because I don't see how, and I by the way, I'm on the very pessimistic camp since even the revolution, the color revolution, because then even I didn't see how democratization is possible without having the proper economic base. I mean, my reading of democratization is in that sense purely economic determinist in a lot of ways. I don't see how that would have been sustained, even if it were a successful revolution, without having the proper economic base. And I don't see that base. And people leaving and people dying is sort of watering down that base even further. So these are the questions that we should consider really. And by the way, I want to say one more thing, but perhaps in the back and forth.
I'll give each one of you panelists 5 minutes to respond to each other. I mean, maybe 4 minutes, sorry, because we have good questions in the Q&A. But obviously, I'm sure you want to say stuff. If not, just you can pass, you don't have to use it. But why don't we go maybe to Varuzhan? Varuzhan, do you have anything to add here to whatever Ayda said or not? Okay, so you're good?
I can just make a small remark about what Ayda said, that even knowing Armenian language is also not enough to understand Armenian politics, because it is very, very, very right now fragmented. And it is very difficult for Armenians living in Armenia to understand what's going on, not only the country, but also what is the real situation with Turkey, with Azerbaijan, what the real intents, because there is so many, let's say, media outlets and media, let's say, different media channels which are translating absolutely different and absolutely, let's say, I'm very sorry for this wording. This is called in American scholarship, this is called bullshit media. There is so much bullshit media right now in Armenian, let's say, informational landscape, not necessarily located in Armenia, which are desperation. There is more, let's say, ignorance of the situation, because sometimes people really don't understand what they need to read to understand the situation, and that's why they usually prefer not to be integrated anymore into any news, let's say, channel or news outlet, so that they are not depressed, but not because they don't really care. They do care, and public opinion surveys, which are actually the only situation with the understanding of the people living in Armenia, and we have probably the best database for all the recent 3 years for the majority of Armenians, at least living in Armenia. And when I'm saying majority, it is around 85 to 90%. For the majority of them, Artsakh is one of them most critical issues, and Artsakh's, let's say, keeping Artsakh Armenian is #1 issue. They are seeing Turkey and Azerbaijan as a military, economic, and political threat, etc., etc. So, I mean, no matter how much they are now engaged in active political process, they are, for them and in their view, still the situation is, let's say, very pro-Armenian. But as we have this media, let's say, mass, that's why sometimes we don't have a proper reaction to what's going on. And one of the brightest examples is the situation with the announcement of the, let's say, change of the policy of Armenia towards Nagorno-Karabakh. So having Nagorno-Karabakh a separate status, and not right now discussing on for the majority of people, this was a known event, though it was officially translated by the Prime Minister of Armenia, but only 40-something% of the society has ever heard about this kind of stuff. So, I mean, this is being created by media, And of course, it is being translated in diaspora as well.
Great, thank you, Varuzhan. Ohannes, do you have anything to add to whatever we discussed thus far?
I mean, not to any peculiar comment, maybe, but if you let me share my screen and to show a photo from the last inauguration of Erdogan, maybe we can make some comments on this. Can you see it now on the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, it's, you asked which one is better for Armenian community, known or unknown? Although I said that I haven't thought on this basis, known versus unknown, but let me show you an I think a very revealing photo from Erdogan's last inauguration ceremony. On the right side of the photo, you see a bunch of people sitting on the first row. If you see, I don't know, can see my cursor. Now I'm showing this is Greek Patriarch Bartholomeus. And this is a man called Aziz Sancar. I'm going to explain who he is. And now this is Armenian Patriarch Sahak Mashalyan. And this is the the leader of Armenian Catholic community, spiritual leader of the Armenian Catholic community, Boz Levon Zekian. And this one, although I'm not sure, I think it's the representative of Vatican. It's another clergy, if you like. And there is a woman, I don't know who she is. The first instance I saw this photo, maybe some others also think like that, it reminds me the Ottoman millet system. At least, of course, it's reimagination by the AKP and Erdogan, because otherwise it would be very difficult to explain the presence of these spiritual leaders, this clergy, in his inauguration. Again, it depends what Erdogan and its circles, what they understand from the Ottoman millet system, but I think it's obvious that they have such an image, such a reconceptualization of this millet system in dealing with their quote-unquote Christian and Jewish minorities. By the way, I'm very curious why Jewish chief rabbi is missing from this photo. I don't have any concrete information about it. Any solid information about it. But again, in dealing with or in treating their non-Muslim Christian and Jewish minorities, it's certain that they have a kind of this reconceptualization, reimagination of Ottoman millet system. Just as a note,
can you tell us who Ancar is? The second.
It's, I don't know, it's very it's mysterious, if you like. This is Aziz Sancar, who is an Turkish scientist working in the United States, and I think he got a Nobel Prize in chemistry or some biology, I don't know. It's very curious why he sits between patriarchs, and I think his only relation with religion is his name Aziz, which means saint in English. I don't know. Again, maybe they made him sit on the place of Jewish rabbi. I don't know why. But again, to turn to our topic, if you say known or unknown, if we should think on this dimension, it's let's say revealing that Erdogan and his ruling party has this kind of some historical imagination in treating these minorities. Okay, let me stop here, and if you have any questions or if any question from audience, we can elaborate from there.
Right. And obviously I can imagine that like Armenians who will see this picture in Turkey, they would also feel a certain type of assurance that things will be okay, that they are recognized and they are elevated. And as we know, they have people groups, sociologically speaking, have institutional memories, reflexes really, like as bodies, to in such a way that the known can assure them, even when they know that things are not great at all. And then there is this conflict, huge conflict between Armenia and Turkey and Azerbaijan. Still, for Armenians in Turkey, I can see that this would be not seen as totally, like this re-election wouldn't totally be seen as a loss or defeat as such, or threatening. Okay, Ayda, now you have your time, 5 minutes maybe. And then
I don't want to use my time. I just want to respond to Ohannes' question. Like if
no, that would be
Ohannes,
your
can it
time.
be that can it be that because Ohannes, because he said that why Jewish community leader is not there? Can it be that because Erdogan was following the Lausanne, and then Lausanne, technically speaking, Jews, remember, they said that they would not follow the Lausanne's principles because it's going to be against Turkey's, fairness or whatever. I cannot remember the exact sort of quote from their point of view. So, and then Ismet Pasha agreed that. Yeah, no, because Ismet Pasha was very happy that Jews did not follow sort of that line of community representation, that kind of thing. Maybe, but I have
but no,
one more
at the
thing
end
about.
they did get. I mean, this is my expertise. So, but I don't think it can be that either, because at the end they did receive the minority rights. They are protected by Lausanne, so they have the same.
No, I understand
status.
protected, but could it be that they explicitly said that they don't want to sort of be bound with that? So at least initially. So the second thing is that I don't know whether Erdogan's sort of this kind of policy is just designed for minorities only. I remember his several balcony speeches, not this one, but the one prior, 2018, where he was it 2018? Maybe Ohannes can correct me. He said that this victory, I remember, in passing, this victory. So this is a feast, he said, for Damascus, for Al-Quds. This is a victory for. I mean, he cited several capitals, which are other sovereign countries' capitals or very important cities, as places where his sort of presidency is going to get celebrated that evening. So probably it is much more of a that neo-Ottomanist idea, larger idea than just something designed for minorities only. I think they're still sort of looking at that grandeur of sorts, which they think is their natural geography still to a certain extent, perhaps part of that. So that's one thing. Number two, something that Lerna said earlier about comparison between the MPs, the current MP, which I have a picture of, I want to show, so that people not following on a day-to-day basis, they understand who this person is. This is our new MP from AKP. So he was elected. This is Sevan Sıvacıoğlu. He's a surgeon, orthopedic surgeon, working for our own hospital, Yedikule Hospital. And then he had been selected as an executive committee member, which is the upper rank of the party, by 2021. And he got elected in the 2nd district from 9th rank. So he's one of the MPs responsible for health and family affairs in the committee, Special Committee for Health and Family Affairs in the 28th legislative term. In terms of comparing to the early AKP MPs, we had Markar Esayan, who died unfortunately at the tender age of 51. 3 years ago, and he was the first MP elected from AKP. The problem is, of course, and this is something that is kind of be approached a little bit with carefully, because the mainstream of Armenian community in Istanbul is more or less sort of defined by the conflict between the church especially via the patriarchate elections, as Ohannes mentioned. And because Markar Esayan has been seen as sort of a proxy for AKP rather than just being an Armenian, but sort of being pro-AKP more than anything else, he has not necessarily been very much liked by certain sort of prominent members who are responsible of delineating the boundaries of discourse within Armenian community in Turkey. But notwithstanding whether he was liked or unliked, obviously he worked in several different committees in AKP, in foreign affairs and other places. So in that sense, this is a continuity in the AKP tradition of electing at least one Armenian. In terms of representation of Armenians, obviously no MP or nobody, none of the representatives can really represent Armenians, because we're not voting that way. Really, we're not voting. It's not like Lebanon or anything like that. We're not districting that way. Although, of course, as Ohannes said, there are districts where Armenians are populated, but our numbers are not enough in any district for kingmaking in that sense. And of course, another discussion is whether do we want an Armenian to represent Armenians. This is another discussion altogether. I, for one, I'm not looking for that kind of representation, ethnic representation. But that's a long discussion. That's a different discussion altogether. But so far, he's been elected, and this is his page and at the parliament. This is him, his phone number, etc., with his CV as the 28th legislative session MP for Turkish Grand National Assembly. So that's that.
Great, thank you, Ayda. Okay, so we have 11 minutes, Mark? Okay, I'm going to summarize some of the, I think-
let's take some of the questions from
yes,
the audience.
Yes, one of them is about the question of Armenians living in Turkey. How do Armenians living in Turkey perceive Pashinyan and what seems to be his controversial stand in favor of Turkey and Erdogan? Who wants to take this question?
I mean, let me at least articulate my observation. First of all, as an precondition, let me say that Armenians in Turkey, generally speaking, do not feel themselves free to comment on relations between Turkey and Armenia or between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So they know very well that there are certain limits for them to talk about Armenia, Azerbaijan, Karabakh, etc. So please keep this in your mind. And coming to the question, at least my impression is that Pashinyan and its politics or its stance is not a major issue among Armenians of Turkey. And when I say of Turkey, of course, I mean Armenians in Istanbul, in Bolis. At least myself, I couldn't observe any considerable remark or comment on Pashinyan and his policies in Armenia and related to Armenia and Azerbaijan relations. Okay, I mean, I cannot say that they have a certain concrete attitude toward Pashinyan and his politics.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Another question, I think this is Varuzhan for you. It's about Ankara and Baku. The question is the following. Is Ankara or Baku currently the main driving force affecting the geopolitical dynamics in the South Caucasus? I guess this is an invitation also to talk about the Russia. Biden doctrine, the Calouste visit, possibly. I mean, where do you see that type of matrix of relationship? Obviously, Russia, Ukraine.
Well, there are two main, let's say, integration of other countries in the South Caucasian geopolitics. The first layer is, I rather would call it a regional one, where we have traditional three main actors in the recent 400 years. This is Russia, Turkey, and Iran, and traditionally they are engaged in the region, and they are those who are on a first hand, they are trying to divide the South Caucasus into their zones of influence, and if it's possible to conquer it, as Russia did, for example, or Ottoman Empire did. And there is the second level. The second level is more global one, where we have like global powers somehow integrated, working together with these regional powers in South Caucasian geopolitics, and this is the US, NATO, China right now, and other countries. So all what's happening here in this region, this is highly intertwined with all these two layers, and that's why we see so much integration by these countries in what's going on. We have EU mission right now situated in the territory of Armenia. We have Russian base in Armenia. We have Iranian active participation in political discussions about Sunni and Sunni's future. So I mean, this is a clear, let's say, multi-level and multi-polar competition territory and over territory of Armenia. And unfortunately, I would say this is with very, let's say, sad feeling that right now Armenia is not part of this discussion. It's rather just like as it is said in old joke about geopolitics. If you are invited to a dinner and you don't have a chair, that probably you are part of the menu. And right now we are in the situation of this being part of the menu, which was not, by the way, the fact before 2020 war. This is unfortunately, again, for me, this knowing how the events developed in Syria, I can say that this is very, very close to what's happened in Syria, just without blood inside Armenia. I mean, there is no civil war between different polars in Armenia, but still, I mean, this is very, very close to that. And that's why we have, as I said, integration of others, and their aims and goals are also very, very clear. For West, it is number one priority, and this is right now being articulated officially. The number one priority is to take out Russia out of the region, so that South Caucasus could be a good transportation hub for energy, first of all, energy resources, and not to let Iran to be more engaged in South Caucasus. And of course, Turkey in this sense is not only just officially a good ally of West, but also a practical ally, because it coincides, or it is in parallel what Turkey wants separately, not being part of West, but separately, it wants its own influence in South Caucasus. And if you have a possibility to use West support in taking out Russia and not letting Iran in, then why not to do that? So that's why we have so much, let's say, support for the Armenian-Azerbaijani reconciliation. We have so much support for Armenian-Turkish reconciliation, no matter what kind of preconditions are there for Armenians and what it will cost to Armenians. And from the Russian and Iranian perspective, it is absolutely the same. I mean, not to let Turkey be so much active in the region, and by letting Turkey in, they know that officially, at least, they are letting in NATO. And here I would like to refer to what Ayda said, that of course there are so many problems among NATO allies, Turkey and US, and Turkey and other allies, but still it's a NATO ally, and still it's gaining the most part of its security and defense from West. And of course there are differences, but these differences are inside of the frames, which are NATO frames.
Thank you, Varuzhan. We have 4 minutes left, but just in 30 seconds, do you think having a different foreign minister would make any difference? From what you say already, I understand that it will not, but can there be any kind of agency on the part of particular people who are going to be employed in this new government.
I was going to chime on that one if you don't mind, Lerna, because I saw the question about
okay,
Hakan Fidan.
sure, yes, and maybe we
This
can.
is a question for Ayda or me? So,
Ayda, are you burning to answer it, Varuzhan, or not?
I can just shortly say that yes, definitely. I mean, then I can elaborate, but after Ayda.
Okay, so let's really then close up with this particular question. Ayda, the floor is yours, and then we'll return to Varuzhan.
First of all, those of you who follow Turkish politics very well know that Hakan Fidan was the spy master prior becoming the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Moreover, Hakan Fidan is from Van. The way how he's presented is like, if you look at on the internet, he's presented as, oh, he's Kurdish from his father's side. I'm like, what do you mean? Normally, if the father is Kurdish, normally we call that person Kurdish in Turkey, but this is how it's framed. So we have 3 Kurdish people in the Turkish parliament, I mean, in the Turkish sort of cabinet, the sort of cabinet ministries in this session, legislative session. It's not session, legislative term, and Hakan Fidan is one of them. Hakan Fidan is an interesting character in a number of ways because he was very instrumental in the Oslo peace process in Turkey, where there were peace talks in Oslo, which had been outed by the former, Gülenist bureaucracy, and then they have been with Erdogan. They have been almost tried for treason in February 2012 when Erdogan was going through a surgery at the time for his cancer. So, and then there was a kind of I think somebody sort of whistle blew, and then Erdogan's surgery was canceled, and Hakan Fidan was not tried, and Erdogan was not tried because there were all sorts of bureaucrats who were against. They were spoilers for the Kurdish peace process. Having said that, even though he was very instrumental in the peace talks, Hakan Fidan also obviously is very instrumental in devising the extra border on the other side of the border, all sorts of operations against the Kurds in that other side of the border, in the Syrian side of the border. Therefore, he's just a regular, brilliant, I have to say, bureaucrat working for the state. And then in that sense, the fact that he's Kurdish or he has been, like in the peace process, perhaps may have a bearing on this sort of term if there is any kind of a peace process between Turkey and Kurds. But I don't see any big incentives at this juncture in time. Maybe they're going to go to another session, but I don't know. In terms of Armenia, it's very difficult to tell, really, for the same reasons, because he has been the spy master. Therefore, he's not a civilian in that. He's a civilian, but not a civilian in that sense. I mean, even if he were a civilian, these ministerial positions are really kind of places where state policies are articulated, are not necessarily totally made in that sense. So therefore, I'm not expecting too much of a change. But let's see how it's going to unfold. So two more ministers, Cevdet Yılmaz and Fahrettin Koca, have been obviously Kurdish ministers, and also actually one more, Mehmet Şimşek, who is right now the minister in charge of the economics of Turkey. He's also, I believe, either from Batman or Bingöl. Batman, he's from Batman. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, Varuzhan, last words of the panel will be yours. Thank you once again, by the way, Varuzhan. You are in Yerevan, and it's so late there. You stayed with us this long. We really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Probably the question is about the foreign minister and the new foreign policy. I'm one of those who said before the elections that the policy is going to be, the foreign policy of Turkey is going to keep the trend which started probably in 2014, when usually in academia we call this period the process of militarization and securitization of Turkish foreign policy. And I see, as Ayda mentioned correctly, I see Hakan Fidan's appointment as new foreign minister as one of the signs of this continuation of this trend, as securitization of foreign policy and using military tool and toolbar for implementing foreign policy goals. And of course, having also the background of Hakan Fidan as the one who was responsible actually as, let's say, not obvious foreign minister for a number of regions like Syria, Iraq, Balkans, and South Caucasus. He was one of the masterminds of the policy implemented in these regions, and he's like right now becoming the number one person for this. I see this as a clear sign that these regions are going to be, or to keep to be, priorities for Turkish foreign policy, and South Caucasus is probably right now number one, even more important than Syria, because we see some attempts to at least freeze what's going on there and put a lot of effort on the South Caucasian dimension, and this is not a good news for Armenia, definitely. I mean, obviously, and of course, using also all the analytical materials that we have right now on the global level or international level, if we can call like this. One of the main spots of conflict right now in greater Middle East is South Caucasus. So that's why, I mean, naturally, Hakan Fidan's position is also important from that perspective. I don't see any, let's say, huge change in any of, let's say, aspirations that were before and right now that could be.
Thank
So
you.
no good.
One
no
last
good.
bit.
Yeah.
Can I add one more quick
Sure.
question, quick point? Mark would remember this because we were talking back and forth during that time, that period of time. There was a point in time, this is 2012, 2013, 14, where Hakan Fidan has been, I would say, pretty much targeted as a spy chief. And he was, I mean, prior to this, we didn't have too many spy chiefs from Turkey being targeted this much in the international press.
Yeah.
And there was a rhyme and reason. He wasn't like targeted in Washington Post and other sort of targeted, obviously from a Turkish perspective, heavily. And there's a rhyme and reason for that. So, and then the fact that he now became, foreign minister is a sign of something. Definitely, especially given the fact that Hakan Fidan did not want to have, want to even leave politics altogether. I wonder what happened in between that he got convinced that he is going to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I'm wondering, I mean, not that I know much about it because I don't follow AKP as a party, because that's AKP historians' business really. But I wonder whether he's being sort of kind of prepared for a larger role in the future, because there's a succession issue in AKP, which is going to sort of be some sort of an issue and a topic in the next 5 years, definitely. Who's going to be the next non-Erdogan in that sense? Because I don't think he's replaceable in that sense, because he has the charisma and whatnot going on. But definitely he's going to be, because he's a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then that is a key position in a lot of ways if they are looking for a successor.
Yes, Varuzhan, 30 seconds.
Just two remarks just to add what Ayda said. One, probably you noticed how his public image was being created back from 2018, when the TV shows and movies started to create this, I mean, very, very close image of Hakan Fidan as a chief of spies at spy service, etc. This was definitely preparation for his, let's say, more active role. And the second thing is, I would like to remind that American press and American analytical centers started to use his image as one of the main successors of Erdogan, along with Hulusi Akar and Süleyman Soylu. So, I mean, probably this, let's say, international perspective is also there, and it is part of this, let's say, possible negotiations over the possible successor of Erdogan.
I think we should stop here, but there is so much more to talk, and I really propose that, Mark, you convene a sequel to this.
We should do a monthly.
Yes. I mean, not monthly,
Clearly,
but
it is an
months.
inexhaustible topic, but I'm really grateful to all of you on the panel and in the audience for doing this on short notice, coming together while it's still pretty fresh. But because it's fresh, or because it will be less fresh perhaps in 6 months, doesn't mean it's still not going to be relevant, because the situation will continue to evolve. But I join with the people who have sent in positive comments and saying how much I appreciate your insights, and Lerna for running the show, and Varuzhan for staying up all night. But of course, those of us on the East Coast as well for taking part, Ohannes, Ayda, and Lerna. And I see in the audience that Fatma Muge has had her hand up since the beginning of the event. I hope it wasn't an emergency, Muge. So
I didn't see it. So
nonetheless, everybody who could attend, thank you. And once again, I thank the Gulbenkian Foundation for their support for these contemporary issues programs. And we will be in touch. Thank you. Stay well.
Nagalutun.
Nagalutun, merci, shut, bye-bye.
Bye.